Footage has emerged proving WNBA referees definitely have an agenda against CaitlinClark and the IndianaFever.
Recent video has surfaced that shows WNBA officials treating CaitlinClark and the IndianaFever with the utmost disrespect. Even casual fans are demanding that these referees be sacked right away since the video evidence is so damning. This is no longer merely poor officiating. The league is unable to conceal this blatant corruption that was caught on tape. In sports, what is the most obvious instance of referee bias you have seen?
You've seen on the last play from Caitlin, and then on top of that, what do you think of your team play game execution?
I thought she got fouled. I think it's pretty egregious what's been happening to us the last few games. A minus 31 free throw discrepancy. And I might be able to understand it if we were just chucking threes, but we're not. We're attacking the rim. And the disrespect right now for our team has been pretty unbelievable. So it's disappointing, that
After years of covering basketball, I felt like I had seen it all. However, it wasn't simply bad officiating that occurred during that Fever versus Liberty game. It was a masterclass in how to undermine professional sports integrity in front of the entire globe.
Some controversy on that last play, no doubt about it. In my opinion, it looked like Natasha Cloud probably fouled her. It was not called. The referees love to swallow.
The footage that came to light depicts something so terrible that it begs the question of whether these officials should be permitted anywhere near a basketball court, much less supervise professional games. 3 adult guys wearing striped shirts are literally ignoring CaitlinClark, Kelsey Mitchell, and the whole Fever bench while attempting to draw their attention to blatantly missed calls.
Talked about the way that the game has been officiated for you guys. How did you see the foul that was not called, or a lack of foul, on the Bonner play, and then follow it up by Lexi Hull getting called for the foul?
I thought it was egregious, honestly. I thought it was obvious. I felt like AB got one, had one going to the rim. They're in rotation. DB's was crazy. We had, and then Lexi's, I felt like equally, we talk about, coming into the path, and it was an offensive player veering into the defensive player's path.
Let's discuss the events leading up to this point before delving into the smoking gun proof. The Fever knew going into the game that they would have to contend with more than simply the Liberty's defense. They have to get beyond an increasingly unsettling officiating trend that appears to be intended to prevent Clark and her crew from being successful. The figures are accurate, and they're simply amazing. There is more to a minus 31 free throw disparity than terrible luck. When you're attacking the rim as hard as the Fever were that evening, it's statistically impossible. Even Stephanie White, who is often tactful in these situations, was unable to contain her annoyance any longer.
The refs messed up 3 calls in the last 3 possessions of this game. First, DeWanna Bonner gets absolutely destroyed, no call. And then Sabrina Ionescu makes the contact. And this is the worst one. There's 1 foul. There's 2 fouls. Then she holds her, watch this, with her shoulder and on her arm.
White made some insightful remarks after the game. She mentioned more than simply the disparity in free throws. The contempt shown to their team has been incredible, she said, calling it heinous. You can tell that things have gone beyond the typical EB and flow of officiating errors when a professional coach begins to use such language. This is what makes the whole thing even more frustrating. Throughout the entire offseason, the WNBA made promises to improve officiating. They discussed accountability, introduced assessment processes, and made lofty claims about raising call quality. Referees will be held to greater standards this season, as Kathy Angelbert herself stated. Where precisely are those better standards, then? Because it wasn't simply poor officiating that we saw. My 4-year-old nephew could see the issues from across the room because the officiating was so biased. And, believe me, most of the time he is more interested in cartoons than in basketball. Video footage taken by a fan during a pivotal point in the game was the most damaging piece of evidence. All 3 referees deliberately chose to disregard the Fever players' frantic attempts to speak with them about missed calls. Not 2 of them, not 1. CaitlinClark, Sophie Cunningham, and Lexi Hall were all deemed unworthy of recognition by all three referees at the same time. That's not a coincidence. That isn't a fleeting error of judgment. Professional athletes who were merely attempting to comprehend why blatant fouls weren't being called were the target of a concerted attempt to demean them. When you see it, the image is startling. Imagine three professional referees who are hired to uphold the game's integrity literally ignoring players who are attempting to politely discuss calls. It's not what you would expect from officials working in the world's top women's basketball league, but rather from middle school refs having a rough day. However, the contempt didn't end there. Throughout the game, we witnessed numerous instances of contact involving Fever players that would often result in foul calls being totally disregarded. Replays of reaching fouls were so clear that it was evident that hands were grasping arms and jerseys without being called. When Clark and her teammates made physical contact in the paint that would send other players to the free throw line, it was handled like regular basketball. The worst instance occurred during a pivotal possession at the end of the game. Clark was attempting to get open for a possible game-winning shot with 1 second remaining. In the video, she is shown being held, grabbed, and hindered in ways that would be considered flagrant fouls in any game with fair officiating. Rather, the referees let New York escape with an undeserved victory by swallowing their whistles. The fact that these same referees had no trouble calling ticky-tack fouls on the opposing end of the court is what makes this more annoying. Fewer players were being mugged without being called, while Liberty players were being sent to the free throw line by touch fouls that hardly registered as contact. Not only was the discrepancy obvious, but it was deliberate. What our eyes were telling us is supported by statistical facts. Given their style of play and the amount of contact they sustained, the Fever attempted fewer free throws than they ought to have. On plays that wouldn't often result in fouls, their opponents were getting to the line in the meantime. Without accounting for prejudice, the numbers don't stack up. We have also previously seen this tendency. There has been a troubling trend of officiating during Clark's second professional season that appears to be intended to lessen her influence on games. It's become harder to ignore the pattern, whether it's letting defenders play more physically with her than they can with other players, or overlooking clear fouls when she's the victim. The most annoying aspect is that the WNBA as a whole is being harmed by this, not just Clark. Because of Clark's presence and the energy she brings to games, the league is seeing an unparalleled increase in viewership and fan engagement. Referees are harming the product that attracts new fans to women's basketball when they actively seek to reduce that excitement through biased officiating. Consider it from a business standpoint. There are more people watching WNBA games than ever before. Merchandise sales are setting new records, attendance is increasing, and television ratings are skyrocketing. All of this expansion is taking place at the same time as one of their biggest players is routinely singled out by refereeing that varies from malevolent to inept. At best, the league's response to these issues has been insufficient. They have made vague claims about supporting their officials and upholding the integrity of the game rather than confronting the blatant patterns of bias. However, when your officials are seen on tape completely ignoring players, how can you uphold your integrity? The league's other coaches have also begun to take notice. They may not be as forthright as Stephanie White, but when queried about officiating consistency, they have made subtle remarks and given knowing glances. Even though they aren't always willing to express it in public, the coaching community is aware of what's going on. The players have been much more forthright. They have expressed their awareness of the bias and frustration at not receiving equal treatment from officials in social media posts and comments following games. You can tell the situation has reached a breaking point when elite athletes begin publicly doubting the officiating's integrity. The fact that these referees appear to believe they are untouchable is really disturbing. The video of them disregarding the Fever players reveals a degree of haughtiness and disdain that implies they think their actions won't have any repercussions. The scenario is made even more frustrating by the likelihood that they are correct. The WNBA has put too much effort into developing their image to allow a few biased referees to ruin it. In order to save the credibility of the entire competition as well as Clark and the Fever, the league must act decisively. You've lost it when spectators begin to wonder if referees, not players, are making the decisions in games. Credibility is the most crucial factor in sports. It's not a difficult answer. The league must admit that there is a problem, look into the particular events that have been reported, and deal with officials who have shown bias. They must enhance accountability procedures, put in place better training programs, and make it apparent that this behavior will not be accepted. More importantly, they must act fast. The league's reputation suffers more with each game that passes with biased officiating, and more fans get disenchanted as they witness their investment in the sport being destroyed by inept or dishonest officials. Fans have taken note. The athletes have taken note. The coaches have taken note. The league officials who have the authority to address the issue are the only ones who don't appear to be aware of it. Whether they will take action before the harm is irreparable is the question. Protecting a single player or team is not the goal here. This is about safeguarding the integrity of women's professional basketball during a period of unparalleled expansion and potential. The momentum that the WNBA has fought so hard to establish cannot be undermined by biased officiating. However, the details are considerably worse than the headlines portray, so let's return to what actually transpired during that game. If it weren't so detrimental to the sport we all adore, the bias would be almost humorous when you break down the individual plays. The tone was instantly established in the opening quarter. Clark made 3 consecutive drives to the hoop while absorbing contact that would have sent most players to the free throw line. Rather, she received nothing. Conversely, Liberty players were receiving scarcely perceptible calls for contact. Even commentators, who often refrain from criticizing referees during live broadcasts, began to doubt the refereeing due to the glaring imbalance. More of the same, although with a twist, appeared in the second quarter. For actions that would typically only earn a warning, the officials began calling technical fouls and flagrant fouls on Fever players. Clark was targeted for technicals as soon as she expressed any emotion on missed calls. However, the referees abruptly gained selective hearing and eyesight when Liberty players did the exact same thing. Even casual spectators in the arena were jeering the refereeing by halftime because the pattern was so obvious. Even before the game was halfway over, the disparity in free throws was getting close to absurd proportions. During the intermission, Stephanie White attempted to discuss it with the officials, but her worries were met with a kind of haughtiness that implies these referees think they are above responsibility. The worst instance of prejudice I have ever seen in professional sports occurred in the third quarter. On a drive to the basket, Clark was fouled so severely that she fell to the ground. The referees made no calls. Her head, body, and shooting arm were all clearly touched on the replay. Free throws ought to have been the outcome of any one of those interactions. Together, the 3 ought to have constituted a blatant foul. Rather, the referees pretended that nothing had occurred. What transpired 30 seconds later made it more worse. A Liberty player went straight to the line for 2 free throws after driving to the basket and hardly being touched. Replay had to display the contact in slow motion in order to observe it. It appeared as though the referees were officiating 2 different games with 2 different sets of rules due to the extreme discrepancy between the 2 calls. The clip that everyone is talking about was released in the fourth quarter. Clark and her teammates attempted to discuss the inconsistencies with the officials while the game was on the line and clear missed calls were mounting. All 3 officials deliberately chose to ignore them and turn their backs on them rather than have a professional conversation. There was no mistaking the body language. These officials weren't too preoccupied to pay attention or too preoccupied with the game to participate. These referees deliberately chose to treat professional athletes disrespectfully when they attempted to have a civil discussion about calls that affected the game's outcome. It has terrible symbolic meaning. Just as they have been figuratively abandoning fair refereeing throughout the season, the referees practically turn their backs on the players. It is impossible to dismiss the visual evidence as a misunderstanding or a brief error in judgment, since it is so devastating. What followed was even more illuminating. While calling phantom infractions on the other end, the referees continued to overlook clear fouls on Clark and her teammates. Even Liberty supporters in the arena began to feel uneasy about the way the game was being refereed, since the bias was so blatant. Everything that was wrong with the refereeing was summed up in the game's last play. The refs did nothing to stop Clark from taking a clean shot after he was caught and held. Several falls that should have sent her to the line for free shots that may have tied or won the game are shown in the video. Rather, as if they had just officiated a masterpiece, the referees let time run out and left the court. The fallout has been equally illuminating. The league has said nothing, neither admitting the issues nor pledging to look into them. There have been no repercussions for the referees who were captured on camera insulting players. Game after game, biased refereeing persists, and there is no indication that anyone in a position of responsibility is concerned enough to take action. This goes beyond a single game or a single poor decision. The integrity of the league as a whole is being threatened by a systemic pattern of bias. Additionally, there are no repercussions when officials actually ignore players. The fundamental basis of competitive sports is destroyed when statistical proof of prejudice is disregarded and players and coaches who voice concerns about unfair treatment are written off. The WNBA is at a turning point. They may either take decisive action to rebuild their officiating's credibility, or they can keep ignoring the issue and hope it goes away. The video is truthful. The numbers are accurate. The bias pattern is evident and well documented. The league must now demonstrate that they genuinely care about fair competition and the integrity of their product. Fans will find other ways to spend their entertainment money if they don't. And it won't matter how far women's basketball has come. The evidence is overwhelming. These referees must be held immediately accountable because they have completely lost control. The WNBA cannot continue to ignore this corruption and expect viewers to stick around. Let us know what you think the league ought to do in the comments. If you want fair officiating, hit the like button. If you want more coverage that reveals the truth, subscribe.